This is a poem called Ghost House. It's from this book of poetry by Robert Frost. Here's the illustration. It looks as if it might be a sunset at the end of the day, but it could be a sunrise. This poem is about the past, and it's an old house that's been abandoned, which is why it's called a ghost house. So if the illustration is about the end of a day, it's kind of like the end of a life, at the end of things, indicating the past. So that's why I would call this a sunset, but it might be a sunrise. Now let's read the poem. I dwell in a lonely house I know that vanished many a summer ago and left no trace but the cellar walls and a cellar in which the daylight falls and the purple-stemmed wild raspberries grow. O'er ruined fences the grapevines shield. The woods come back to the mowing field. The orchard tree has grown one copse of new wood and old, where the woodpecker chops, and the footpath down to the well is healed. I dwell with a strangely aching heart in that vanished abode, there far apart, on that disused and forgotten road that has no dust bath now for the toad. Night comes, the black bats tumble and dart. The whippoorwill is coming to shout and hush and cluck and flutter about. I hear him begin far enough away, full many a time to say his say, before he arrives to say it out. It is under the small, dim summer star. I know not who these mute folk are, who share the unlit place with me. Those stones out under the low-limbed tree doubtless bear names that the mosses mar. They are tireless folk, but slow and sad, though too close-keeping are lass and lad, with none among them that ever sings, and yet, in view of how many things, as sweet companions as might be had. This poem is interesting in that each stanza has 5 lines. A stanza is like a paragraph in a poem. So that's a stanza, and there's 6 of them. Each one has 5 lines. A lot of poetry has stanzas with an even number of lines, like 4 or 6 or 8 or 12 or 14, so that pairs of lines can rhyme, or every other line can rhyme. So let's look at the rhyme scheme in this poem. The first 2 lines rhyme, no and ago. And then look at the 5th line, grow. And then the 3rd and 4th lines rhyme, walls and falls. So the rhyme scheme would be A, B, B, A. When analyzing rhyme scheme in poetry, usually we assign letters of the alphabet to the rhyming sound, and that way we can see the lines that match. And then if those sounds repeat later in the poem, you would use those same letters. In the next stanza, we have shield and field. That's a new sound, so we're giving it a new letter, CC. And then copse and chops would be DD, and then healed would be C, because it rhymes with shield, field, and healed. Then we have heart and apart and dart in the last line of that stanza. And those are new sounds, so we'll give them new letters. E, F, F, E. And then this one would be G, G, H, H, G. I, J, J, I. And then K, K, L, L, K. So you have the rhyme scheme. A lot of the imagery and the words in the poem convey the past. So let's look at what the poet is saying. I dwell in a lonely house, I know. Oh, it's lonely because no one's there anymore. That vanished many a summer ago. It sounds like a house that he might have lived in or visited in the summertime. So when someone says many a summer ago, or many a moon ago, or many a something ago, it's a way of saying many years ago, because a summer happens once a year. And left no trace but the cellar walls. Now, most houses, at least in the Northeast, where Robert Frost lived, had cellars or basements, and that would be the foundation of the house, and the cellar would have walls. So when a house falls down or is torn down, you'll still see the foundation, and so it sounds as if this house has fallen down or was torn down, unlike the illustration which shows a house. What he's describing is a house that's not there anymore except the walls of the cellar, and a cellar in which the daylight falls. Normally, light from the sun can't get to the cellar because the house is on top of the cellar. In this case, the house isn't there anymore, so the daylight can fall into the cellar, and the purple-stemmed wild raspberries grow. And so now the house is so overgrown that the wild raspberries are growing into the cellar. And I love the colors described, because we can think of the color of raspberries, but I think normally we may not think of the color of the stem of the raspberries. And the next stanza, or ruined fences. So or is a poetic way of saying over. The apostrophe shows that a letter is missing, in this case the letter V for over. And it makes the word one syllable instead of over, which is two syllables, or is one syllable. In poetry, often the syllables are very important for the rhythm and the length of each line. So Frost chose to use the word or because it flowed better with this particular line. Or ruined fences, the grapevines shield. So the fences are ruined, and there are grapevines shielding the ruined fences, just growing all over them. The woods come back to the mowing field. So here, the mowing field is the field that would have been mowed, when it was a working farm. But the woods have grown back over the field because no one has lived there for so long. The orchard tree has grown one copse. If you go down to the corner of the page, you'll see some words that are defined. So a copse is an orchard or a field. The orchard tree has grown one copse of new wood and old where the woodpecker chops. So it sounds as if the orchard has just grown into many trees. A copse can be many trees that are clumped together. So it just describes that the orchard has overgrown because it's been so long since anyone has lived there. So there's new wood and old. And the woodpeckers are still there, pecking on that. The footpath down to the well is healed. When you walk on the ground, you step on the grass that's on the ground, and if people are walking on that path a lot, then the grass can't grow. So here the wood path has healed. The grass has grown back to the point where you may not even be able to see the footpath down to the well. The well is where they would have gotten their water. In this picture, this might have been the well where they got water. No one has walked here for a long time. Now the third stanza. I dwell with a strangely aching heart in that vanished abode there, far apart, on that disused and forgotten road that has no dust bath now for the toad. Okay, I dwell, meaning he is there. You dwell somewhere, it means you are lingering there, with a strangely aching heart. So when someone has an aching heart, they often are longing for something that they don't have or that they've lost. In that vanished abode, an abode is someplace where you live, but this has vanished. On that disused and forgotten road. So the road hasn't been used and it's been forgotten. No one has used it, so no one's thinking about it. That has no dust bath now for the toad. So the road isn't even dusty anymore because it's overgrown. Usually roads are dusty when there's nothing growing in the dirt, and so the dirt gets dry and dusty. So just from these 4 lines, we can get an image of how the road has overgrown. And this place where he used to dwell has largely vanished. And then the last line, night comes. You see how there's a semicolon? A semicolon is not as strong as a period at the end of a sentence, but it's stronger than a comma in the middle of a sentence. So night comes, it gives a sense of being sudden. The black bats tumble and dart. Here we have something called alliteration, which is a type of consonance. And this is a poetic tool that's used. The B in black and the B in bat repeats. So that's what's called alliteration. And you also have assonance, which is a repetition of vowel sounds, the a and the a, black bats. Night comes, the black bats tumble and dart. So we get a sense of what nighttime is like here. And to dart, we go down to the words that are defined. It means to skip around. So they're moving fast just here and there. The whippoorwill is coming to shout. A whippoorwill is a small bird that sings at night. So here we are at night. So that would confirm that this really is sunset, because now it's nighttime. The whippoorwill is coming to shout and hush and cluck and flutter about. I hear him begin far enough away, full many a time to say his say before he arrives to say it out. So he can hear the whippoorwill before he even gets there. It is under the small, dim summer star. Okay, so here we have summer again. The beginning of the poem, he mentions summer. And it's nighttime, so you can see the stars. I know not who these mute folk are. Mute means they don't speak. They're quiet. Who share the unlit place with me. So he's acknowledging beings that are there. Not just the animals and the birds, but people he imagines are still there. Or perhaps the spirit or the memory of people who lived there. Who share the unlit place with me. So there are no lights. It's nighttime now and it's out in the middle of nowhere. There's no electricity. No one living there, so there are no lights. Those stones out under the low-limbed tree doubtless bear the names that the mosses mar. Okay, so there's a tree with low limbs, and there are stones underneath the tree that maybe people have written their names in. You know how people do that? They write their names in the bark of a tree. Mar means to blemish. And mosses will grow on tree bark over time, or they'll grow on stones. And in this case, the names may be on the stones. Just names of people who have lived there. But everything's overgrown. Even the moss has grown over the stones. They are tireless folk, but slow and sad. Though, too, close-keeping are lass and lad. Lass and lad are words describing a girl and a boy, a young girl and a young boy. So he's imagining two people who used to live there, and he's imagining that they are still there in spirit, with none among them that ever sings. So no one sings, no one speaks. And yet, in view of how many things as sweet companions as might be had. These are two people that loved each other and loved being with each other, that he's imagining are still there. It's really, I find it's very interesting and amazing how one scene like this, perhaps this was a house that the poet actually lived in at one time or knew in the past, or perhaps he just came across it on one of his long walks. Robert Frost used to love going on long walks in nature. and maybe he came across this abandoned house that had fallen down and was just describing everything and imagining the people who used to live here. This is something that we all can do if we take the time to just notice things, especially when we're outside in the woods or in our backyard or in a park or maybe in a neighborhood and you notice houses, or you're driving somewhere and you notice fields, farmland, anything that you're passing. You can just connect with it and notice things. All the little details, just the way Robert Frost did in this poem. The color of the stems of the wild raspberries, and how the orchard has new wood and old wood, and how the path was covered up by the grass that had grown since people had walked on it. The sound of the birds, stars in the sky, mosses covering stones. There's so many details and so much beauty that we can notice, and it might bring to mind some things that you imagine or things that you remember from your life. Thank you for reading this with me.